So thank you everyone for joining us today for another RDA4EOSC webinar. We're going to look at organizational interoperability today. My name is Timea Biro. I work for the Digital Repository of Ireland and the RDA4EOSC initiative. Today I'm joined by Oscar Corcho from UPM, Juan Vicaregui from SDFC, and Dharma Wardena from Sitrax. Just before we start, a few housekeeping points. We are recording this session and we're going to make the recording available online. Please mute your microphone. We are in a meeting format, so whenever you are not speaking, it would be good to keep your microphone muted. You can use the raise hand option to signal when you want to ask a question, and you can also use the chat for that. And for any other comments or suggestions you might have. In the next few minutes, I'll try to set the scene on the topic from the RDA4EOSC perspective, and then Oscar is going to talk to us about addressing organizational interoperability from the point of view or the work that is being done at UPM on this area, and then we're going to be joined by Juan and Kieran for an open discussion on the wider topic. So, without further ado, just to give you a little bit of background on the work that has been done under RDA4EOSC for the organization. So one of the pillars of this activity has been focused on trying to identify areas that organizations should be looking at in order to improve their engagement with the EOSC. And we have developed a series of policy briefs and coordination webinars to facilitate the discussion and the knowledge exchange on the topic. We do have a policy brief that tries to bring forward a few of the issues related to organizational interoperability, and also provides a set of recommendations. At the links that you see on your screen, you can view this report and some of the recommendations and the sort of topics that we have tried to detail in the policy brief. I'm not going to go into detail for these, but we did try to provide a sort of a perspective from the RDA side, looking at organizational interoperability as a socio-technical challenge that can be addressed by leveraging RDA as a forum for building these social and technical bridges. I'm also hoping that that the discussion that we're going to have later on will shed some light on the EOSC interoperability framework and also how those connect to the rules of participation. But before we start the presentations and the discussion, I would like to kindly ask you to go to Menti. We have a couple of questions just to understand who's in the audience and maybe frame a little bit better the discussion that we're going to have. I'll try to move to the Menti. Let's see if this works. So you should have the code on your screens, 37616349. The first question relates to your organizational type, or to the type of organization that you belong to. Is it a research performing organization and a funder, maybe an infrastructure or other research providing service providing organization, maybe a governmental one, maybe you're a publisher or a private sector organization, or some other category that we might not have covered in this, but we're very interested to see if there are such categories. So I see most of you represent research performing organizations, some service providers. We do have others, and also people coming from the private sector. Thank you very much for that. I see we have 16 answers. I'm going to move on to the next question. I've managed to see. Okay. We would also be interested in your role. As we know, the issue of organizational interoperability is being addressed by different structures based on the well, on the structure of the specific organization. So we are interested to see what your role is, whether you are part of the management, more working on the IT side, product designer, project manager, whether yes, you are part of a wider project across the organization. You are a senior researcher, research data specialist, open science ambassador. That's very interesting. Semantic evangelist. It's very interesting. Policy setting, coordinators. Most of you seem to be researchers, which is it's very interesting because that means that well, it comes from the researcher side, the interest. Community builder, open science support, advocate, academic. Thank you very much for that. I will try to move on to the next question, which is obviously related. We would like to see what your interest in the topic is. Are you part of work that is being done at your organizational level, or is it just out of generic interest that you have joined the webinar? You can also use this moment to ask a question, or maybe highlight some of the challenges that you are addressing, and for which a discussion might be useful. So, a generic interest in interoperability, that's very good. Future data sharing, of course, interested in all in interoperability in all its dimension, multi-site interdisciplinary data integration, so that's very specific. An interest in general in the developments, link to other initiatives in the area, link between domains, bottom-up interoperability approaches from the organizational staff. Yes, that's a perspective that we had actually had in mind. So just to understand from the organizational perspective, what are the done in order to improve interoperability. Okay, how to implement internal and external interoperability. Thank you very much for all your answers. We're going to keep the Menti open. So if you do have additional points that you would like to add, that would be very useful. Thank you very much. I will actually stop sharing my screen, and I'll pass the floor to Oscar, who is gonna speak to us about the organizational interoperability work that is being done at UPM. So thank you, Oscar. Take it away.
Okay. I hope that you can see now my screen. Yeah. Okay. So thanks for the introduction, ma'am. I think that, I mean, like when you told me, well, can you talk a little bit about the work that you were doing in the EOS interoperability framework with respect to the organizational interoperability, and some of the activities that you are actually doing in that context? I thought, well, that's going to be a difficult type of presentation, yeah, because I mean, like on the one hand, we have done some work in the interoperability framework in order to try to understand which were the main reasons for, I mean, like talking about organizational interoperability. But it was probably the area or the layer that we were paying a little bit less attention to. And at the same time, I mean, at Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, I'm the person who is responsible for open science, for defining the open science roadmap, how we can start adopting as a research performing organization a more open science like approach, considering the characteristics of our own university. But still, I mean, we are in our infancy. We are starting. So, I mean, what I'm going to be telling you is a little bit about things that are not yet completely mature, but how we are approaching them. And I hope, I mean, that this can serve to have some initial discussion, yeah, on what can be done. So I'm taking, yeah, from your slide, the main topics here that you were highlighting at the very beginning, regarding the fact that this is a socio-technical challenge. And I think that, I mean, this is really, really important. Also, the aspects related to having clear specifications regarding the processes, services, data, skills, roles, and so on. I think that also that's also fundamental. But I mean, the most important piece for me is this one, where we say that departments and areas inside an organization shouldn't be developing in isolation from each other. I think that that's key. That's very important, and I think that, I mean, this is something that we really have to take into account. So, what am I going to be talking about? First of all, a little bit giving you a brief description of the process that we followed to come up with the parts that are related to organizational interoperability in the EOSC interoperability framework. Then discuss the status where we are in terms of open science adoption at UPM, and which are our next steps. Yeah, and you will see, I mean, probably they will be quite similar to many of those that you are already approaching in your own organizations, and probably I can even learn from you rather than you learning from me. So, I mean, I hope that this will serve as a nice point for discussion. So let's start with a very brief description of the EOS interoperability framework. I'm not going to extend too much on this because it's not the main purpose of today's talk, but just giving you an idea. This was work that we were doing over the last 2 years, yeah, 19 and 20, even if year 2020 almost didn't exist. And it was done in the context of one of the task forces from the FAIR working group. Also, the architecture working group was participating over there. We had two main places, yeah, where we were kind of, I mean, like where we had some checkpoints, yeah, let's say. One in the middle of the year 2020, where we developed the first version of the EOS interoperability framework. Then we received lots of comments, and then by the end of the year, in fact, I mean, finally, it was in February 2021, we released the final document. So the EOS interoperability framework is placed over here. I mean, this is in the context of the strategic research and innovation agenda of EOS, which is again evolving. I mean, most probably these figures will not stay, yeah, much longer afterwards. But I mean, just to see that it is always important to consider organizational interoperability and not only the usual technical, semantic, and so on. Yeah. So that said, this was the final result that we had in terms of them. Sorry, I mean, I was just taking out the noise from my mobile phone. So this was the final document that we provided, where we are introducing like the main context and definitions, the interoperability layers, and I mean, you have it available over there. I think that it is a nice read. It's not just because I have been heavily involved on it, but I think that it tries to summarize many of the open challenges, needs, recommendations that we have in terms of achieving full interoperability or as much interoperability as possible in the context of EOS. A key part of the work that we were doing was basing our analysis in these 4 levels of interoperability, yeah? Technical, semantic, organizational, and legal. To be honest, I mean, the areas where we were paying more attention and that are better developed in the context of the document are those ones related to semantic interoperability, because we were discussing quite deeply on the way that we should be handling ontologies, metadata, how we should make sure that all definitions are there. And obviously, I mean, there will be an organizational side, as we haven't already seen, yeah, on the need to handle all these common metadata standards, ontologies, and so on. And also, we had a lot of work done in the legal interoperability part, which is also quite interesting in terms of all these aspects related to copyright, licenses, data protection, GDPR. But in terms of organizational interoperability, we were already discussing on some problems and needs, recommendations, and in fact, I mean, the recommendations that have been already been discussed, yeah, at the very beginning, yeah, of this talk are those ones that we were providing in this context, yeah. In general, first of all, that we need to really focus on aligning all the processes that different organizations are using. We had probably like a little bit of a bias towards those organizations providing services in EOS, but we also talk about researchers who want to start adopting open science and they don't know how to start with, yeah, because they don't have clear guidelines from their organizations. Also, we should have a clear view of who is responsible for what. And even again, if we are probably focusing at the very macro level on EOS related things like who has catalogs of services, registries of services, common PID services, ontology services, and so on, this could be also applicable inside the organizations. And in general, I mean, there are plenty of impediments that we identified with the interviews that we had with different researchers, and also those people who are providing services inside organizations. In fact, my reflection over here would be that probably, yeah, as I have said, the text and the recommendations are focused too much on the macro level, EOS-wide, and on service providers. But I mean, we should also have to consider the practices, the policies of research performing organizations and of their groups, of the research groups, of their researchers. So, given this context, now I can move into what is the current status. I mean, where are we in terms of open science adoption at our university? Yes, as an example of, I mean, like research performing organizations that has not done particularly well in terms of open science, but where there are open science related researchers. And in fact, I mean, for some of you who may know me, you know that I come also from the world of ontology engineering, clearly, semantic web, and at the same time on open government data. And I think that, I mean, it is quite nice to make a reflection on the relationships between open government data and open scientific data, yeah, okay? So are they the same? I would say no, yeah, I mean, like, is it very different? Quite the opposite, I would say no, they are not so different because they are mostly talking about the same things, yeah? Data can be freely used, reused, redistributed by anyone, and funders are actually encouraging the generating of open research data. But there are also some differences, yeah, between those two areas, yeah? For instance, I mean, in open science, I would say that we don't have such a large history of legislation. In fact, I mean, like open government data is something where there is a lot of regulation, a lot of legislation, and that's one of the key elements, yeah? So far, open science was mainly focused on open access, on papers for quite a long time, yeah, until more recently. It's not only available for use and reuse, reproducibility is quite important in the context of research. And it is often not useful without the rest of research artifacts. So, I mean, data is not useful if you don't have also code, software protocols, papers, and things alike. But focusing on the commonalities, I could say that, I mean, there are things that have happened and they are the same across these two worlds of open government data and open research data. There has been an explosion of data portals, research data portals, and this happened also in open government data. You have general purpose ones, region-specific ones. The one that you see over here is the one that we have in the region of Madrid in order to provide our data sets. Which one do we select? This region-specific or the general one, which is Zenodo? Should we take a domain-specific one? Should we take an institution-specific one? I mean, you have over here one for one of the national research centers in Spain, focused on agronomy. So there is always this type of questions that researchers are normally doing to themselves. At the same time, there are a good number of alternative technologies that have been used for data repositories. No problem at all. I mean, this is perfectly okay, but they have their own services. And also a good number of metadata schemes. Yeah, and I mean, these are only just a few of the many that we are analyzing and that we have to use. And if we go into domain-specific metadata schemes, it's even worse. Yeah, okay. So our question would be, are we applying what we learned from open government data? I mean, having working on open government data, convincing governments of getting to be, to treat data in an homogeneous manner, to have very clear principles and governance principles for the data that they are releasing, but I'm not succeeding yet in doing this in science, yeah? So we are still making some of the main mistakes, the same mistakes. We don't give clear instructions to researchers on what to upload, what not to upload. There is no clear governance on who is the main person that has to upload data. Should it be the researchers? Should it be the librarians? Should it be a combination of them? Some organizations just think that setting up a data infrastructure is enough. I mean, this is the case that we have in our own region of Madrid. And many things, many other people think as well, oh, if you have more objects in the repository, if there are more from UPM than from this another university, we are better. This is not necessarily the truth. Yeah. Okay. So these are some of the things that, I mean, we are experiencing whenever, I mean, people at UPM are approaching me just to, I mean, ask, what should I do? Yeah. And in fact, I mean, one clear example of what's happening is this situation that probably you have in your own institutions as well. And I challenge you to check it. Yeah. So if I go to OpenAir to explore a part of OpenAir, and I try to look for places, yeah, where UPM, Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, appears, I see that there are at least like 6 places, and there are even more, yeah, with different numbers of publications, different numbers of data sets. So there is not just a single ID for UPM, even if we know, I mean, and many of you may discuss afterwards that there are already ORCIDs for organizations, yeah, I mean, we have already a registry for this. Why aren't we applying this? Why is it the case that I can generate my own community over here in OpenAir and then have access to this type of information in a non-homogeneous manner? So this would be the current state, yeah, okay? And there are some key messages that I'm trying to put together, I mean, when I'm talking to my colleagues at UPM. First of all, I mean, the very clear one, open science is not open access, it's not only open access, there are many other things. And I mean, this is a cultural change that has to happen, and it's still like that, yeah? Many people think about open access because they see it more closely. We need principled approaches and clear guidelines as a community or as an institution in order to adopt this open science approach. And I mean, obviously, we expect that this non-extra, it shouldn't be an extra work, but for the time being, it is seen as extra work, should pay off in the future for researchers, yeah? Okay, so that said, we started in June 2020, not a very good time for starting this, but I mean, it had been discussed before the pandemic. We started working together on an open science initiative at UPM. Several researchers, some of them, I mean, like also well known, I mean, from some of the work that we have been doing in terms of open science, citizen science, open hardware, and things alike, with the main objectives of developing a strategic roadmap for the institution, for UPM, practical guides that could be used by researchers, making a clear analysis of the existing infrastructure that we have, having dashboards to understand where we are in terms of open science adoption, and later on the part on training and skills, yeah, and letting people know, yeah, dissemination, engagement, training to postdocs, but also to early researchers, early stage researchers, to PhD candidates, yeah. So on this, we are working with different research communities, which we have identified at UPM. So we have digital innovation hubs. I mean, I'm part of one of them, the one on AI and robotics, and also communities that are going around sustainability. Yeah, I mean, like circular economy, emission-free UPM, UPM water, and so on. These are communities of researchers from different departments, from different schools that are coming together in order to serve challenges and to try to provide solutions that are also applicable directly to UPM. So this is a very nice common ground, yeah, to work with. We have a clear roadmap, yeah, which is this one. I mean, as you see, is kind of medium term. I mean, we will finish by 2023 with a strategic roadmap for open science adoption at UPM. And in the meantime, we are working on materials, on practical guides that can be used by researchers, and on the deployment of repository systems that may be needed at UPM, even if our intention is to use as much as possible from those things that are already provided by the EOSC ecosystem. Yeah? In order to understand, just to finish where we are at UPM, I could tell you, sorry that this part is in Spanish, I mean, it was already generated. We have been taking the LIRU checklist for open science, which we found interesting, useful in order to make the types of questions that we should be questioning ourselves. And we can see, I mean, that at least half of the tasks that we should be doing have not even started yet, yeah? So we are still quite far from having a widely deployed open science approach at our university, yeah? There are strong points, I mean, things that we are already doing that could be improved, yeah. But there are still weak points on things that we have not even started, like, I mean, having a very clear open science structure with ambassadors, with staff, having a clear view on indicators, providing rewards in terms of human resources, and also on the training courses. Things that we are putting some actions on right now, yeah? This would be the institutional part. I have also my own view on my own research group, yeah? Why not eating my own dog food, yeah? And trying to see what I do. This would be a very bottom-up approach. And this is all the things that we are trying to combine together at UPM. Why do I present it? Because it's also relevant from the point of view of governance, of the organizational interoperability. We have to make sure that research groups, as well as departments, as well as individual researchers or research communities, follow or start adopting similar principles, always taking into account the characteristics that they have. And over here, I mean, my own group, the Ontology Engineering Group at UPM, we are already doing some open science, yeah? So obviously, I mean, we publish our papers using the Open Archive at UPM's library, that's quite clear. We do our data management plans with DMP Online, Pagoda, now with Argos. We are normally handling our data sets in GitHub. Our software is always in GitHub and with open licenses as much as possible. We have also Docker images to ensure some reproducibility or replicability of the experiments. Ontology is a theory that we are creating because, I mean, we are also ontology developers. They are also stored in GitHub, and we have a very clear overview of how they have to be handled and how they have to be archived, and they are published online. But we're still missing many things, yeah? And we are starting with them. So when a new research, a new experiment starts, a new GitHub repository is created. This is something that we are now starting with all our PhD students. Our repositories are connected to Zenodo so as to provide releases and to have DOIs quite easily. We avoid having Dropbox, G Drive links in our papers. This is prohibited in our case. And we even do scientific communication and outreach with tweets and tweet threads about the papers that we have published. And we have our own Zenodo community. Again, one more that can be explored through OpenAir, and that is not the UPM official one, yeah? Okay, so these are things that happen. This happens even in a research group that is very open science oriented. And I mean, if we see all these points here from different aspects of open science, these would be the ones with the tick, would be the ones that we are already doing. There are many others that we are not doing so far. Yeah, okay, so we have some type of roadmap. So just to finish, which are our next steps? Quite basic. I mean, as I've told you, probably I will have to learn more from you than you from me. We have done this analysis. We have been talking to the research communities, and we are now starting writing down the actions. So the ones that I'm presenting you right now are not definitive. I mean, they are just examples of things that we are considering, and there will be many more. I mean, this has to be consensuated and shared with the UPM rectorate, with the vice rectors, and also with the research communities in order to start, and the librarians to start moving towards an open science UPM by 2023, and then a little bit later on. So we have now short, medium, long-term actions. Many of them focus on people. We will put a lot of focus on training material for the International Doctorate School with educational appeals. I mean, reusing a lot of material that is already existing, but also taking into account the characteristics from our researchers. And we are creating a network of ambassadors for each community, for each school, for each department, to help those researchers that have specific needs. And obviously the ones from civil engineering are not the same needs as those ones from computer science. Yeah, so we really have to take those things into account. In terms of organizations, we are creating guidelines for the UPM presence in EOS-related services, also for the publication of other research products through incentives that are going to be taken into account, I mean, money that you can receive and many other things, not just money, and also, I mean, creating these dashboards for the institution. And then we're also pushing for a little bit more citizen science with some seed examples that we have inside UPM, but trying to go a little bit farther and trying to go closer to citizens, especially through the ELISA communities. So in the end, I mean, we hope that in 3-4 years, we will have like a full-fledged open science office at UPM. So this is more or less, I mean, probably now you say, oh, but I mean, I wanted to have more actions. I wanted to know much better which are the specific things that you are going to do. But I wanted to be frank. Yeah, I mean, this is where we are. This is the situation that we have now. And this is how it relates to the work on organizational interoperability that we were working in the EOSIF. So with this, I finish my presentation, and probably Timea is your moment too.
Thank you very much for that. I thought it was a great presentation. I mean, seeing all the different layers that you are addressing, and also the fact that there is a strategy, an organizational strategy behind it that drives this forward. It's very interesting to see, because you have a very good breakdown, and the focus on people is very important. And I like the fact that you have highlighted that across the presentation. We're going to move on to the discussion. So if you have any questions and anything like that, please, for Oscar, please hold them until we will open the floor for questions. But first, I would like Juan to say a few words about, well, organizational interoperability, the EOSC interoperability framework that Oscar has briefly presented, and also the rules of participation, because one of the recommendations and the work that has been highlighted in the EOSC interoperability framework connected to the rules of participation. So the floor is yours, Juan. Thank you.
Thank you, Timea, and thank you to Oscar for the introduction. So I'm going to talk to you mostly about the rules of participation for EOSC. Clearly, one way that we enable interoperation is through standards. And one way we can set the framework that gives credibility or authority to those standards is through the rules of participation. And note that the rules of participation don't actually set the standards. They're the framework in which we can give authority to certain standards. And I'm going to outline the approach we took to the rules of participation under the previous governance of EOSC, the EOSC Executive Board in 2019-2020, and the rules as they were published in January of this year. So the approach we took was all about balancing a number of things. One of the things that had to be balanced in the rules was kind of balancing the ease of participation, the degree to which we can have adoption of EOSC, against the ease of integration. Clearly, the more firm you make the rules, the easier it is to enable interoperation of various things in EOSC. But on the other hand, it's more difficult to participate, so you'd get lower adoption. The looser the rules are, makes perhaps interoperation more difficult, but on the other hand, it makes participation easier. So that was one of the balances we had to find. Another balance we had to find was about the different communities. It's clear that the different communities that are going to participate in the EOSC are starting from different places. So every time we suggested something very concrete in a rule, someone would say, but that would make it impossible for this group to participate initially because we're just not there. We're using some other standard. We're doing something else. A third dimension in which we wanted to balance things is about the ability to change. So small projects, small individual services, individual data set owners might be able to adapt quickly, but large infrastructures, large data repositories often have large communities working within those infrastructures or with those repositories. Much more difficult to change things there. So, or at least much slower, possible, but slower. And there we took an underlying principle that if it isn't broken, let's not try and fix it, because we could quite easily make things worse if we don't get it right. So the approach we took was really, we went for the greatest ease of participation. So to get high adoption of EOSC, at least in the early stage. It would seem strange to exclude communities from something that is, after all, called an open science cloud. And I think by taking this kind of slow introduction approach, we've at least agreed a baseline. I don't think there's anyone arguing with the rules as they are in that document at the moment. They are really just high-level rules or meta rules or principles, with some discussion about how we got to them. And at least now we have an agreed baseline that we can build on. The rules rely heavily on the idea of delegation of responsibility, and I'll talk more about that later. And doing that, we give a low barrier to entry, but we still recognize the possibility of having additional badges that somehow show a higher level of interoperability or a higher level of fairness or whatever it is. We also made a concrete plan for how the how the roles might evolve in future. And there's the second document about the ownership and evolution of the rules. So there are just 8 rules. Each rule is one short sentence. I won't go through them all now, but it's the first, second, and third that are most important in the context here. The first rule is basically saying that EOSC is based on the principle of openness, and that openness applies to everything, including participation in EOSC. So we really take the idea that things must be as open as possible and only closed where necessary. And that underlies the whole approach we've taken in the rules and throughout EOSC. I'm going to talk mostly about rules 2 and 3. Rule 2 says EOSC resources align with the FAIR principles, and Rule 3 says that EOSC services align with the EOSC architecture and interoperability guidelines. So it's really those two that give the basis for interoperability. Rule 2, that the resources align with the FAIR principles. This is largely about data, but does apply to all resources. And in particular, in the guidance, we note that data without the software that you need to interpret that data is fairly useless. So in the cases where software is needed to interpret the data to make the results reproducible, then that software needs to be open as well, or comply with FAIR principles as well. We give references to the 3 key documents developed in that time, the recommendations on FAIR practice, FAIR's FAIR project outputs, and the FAIR data maturity model, which is being developed by a working group in RDA. We do note that individual research objects may have specific terms and conditions associated with them. Not everything can be completely open. But we say that those terms and conditions must comply with the EOSC FAIR principles. So we're delegating, and we delegate the checking of that to the repositories or whichever channel is being used to distribute the research objects in questions. We say there's no threshold to the fairness. There's no minimum threshold. That's sort of recognizing that disciplinary norms differ widely. There's no threshold of quality either. The reasoning behind those ideas is that if something really is unique, if a piece of data or a piece of software is unique, people may want to use it, and they may put up with a lot in terms of difficulty of interoperability. They may be willing to do all sorts of reformatting and reworking of software just because the resource is unique. On the other hand, where resources are plentiful and there may be lots of different versions of some data storage or service out there, then it's very important that we are able to understand the quality of the resource we're talking about, so that the potential reuser can assess the fairness of the resource under consideration. So that's basically about openness. And this, as I said before, could be through certification. It could be through self-assessment against some metrics like the FAIR data maturity model. But necessarily the processes and the responsibilities and the decision-making of that need to be transparent and open. Rule 3 is the EOSC services align with the EOSC architecture and interoperability guidelines. The aim here is that we want a coherent framework. We want to remove the silos. We want to enable integration of data and services, both within geographical and disciplinary boundaries and also across geographical and disciplinary boundaries. There are 4 key documents there: the implementation of FAIR practice documents, 6 recommendations, the persistent identifier policy, the interoperability framework, and the AAI blueprint from the ARC project. And With these and other things that will continue to be developed, of course, we hope that this enables services and user environments to be built across the EOSC resources. EOSC is a lot of things in one framework so that you can build on top of those and get things working across them. For example, these may require federated AAI, and they may require services to describe themselves in a commonly agreed metadata scheme. So for that, we say that service providers must define and publish the terms of use of their services, and that these must be published in a form that comply, and that these terms of use must comply with EOSC principles. And we say that service providers may define and publish their own quality targets, but in doing so, they must agree that the EOSC core, the EOSC operators, may monitor and report on the service levels that are actually achieved, and see whether they meet the targets they've set themselves. This is kind of a baseline minimum, and we say that significant stakeholder engagement is required over time to establish the cooperative development of the guidelines and to bring about a uniform adoption of the standards, policies, and processes and practices. So that's really the feeling behind Rule 3. As you can see, we're really focusing very much on delegation of responsibility. So then finally, just a couple of words about how we expect the rules to evolve. In the ownership and evolution document, we say we established a ROP board under the association so that this can provide the basis for integrity across the different sources in the federation. We note that EOSC is mostly a federation of independent resources. There's an EOSC core, which is slightly different, but most of the resources on EOSC are independent. So very importantly, the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality, which are embedded in the whole of the legislation and the treaties around the European Union, saying that things should be devolved to as low a level as possible, those apply here too. So we try to balance between centralized and delegated monitoring of the resources, and in order to ensure that the participants align with the aims of EOSC. And there's more details about the terms of reference and the authorities of that board in the document. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan, for that perspective from the rules of participation. I'll pass the floor now to Kieran, and I'll try to share my screen because we don't have a slide for him.
Thanks, Timia. Look, I'll keep it really brief. I'd like to get onto a discussion also than me talking here. I just really wanted to give a really quick introduction to some of the work that's happening in Research Data Alliance around this topic. So as we heard, there are lots of challenges around organizational interoperability, and a lot of them come down to the people. So one of the things, this was sort of recognized in RDA some time back, and interest group was established called the Social Dynamics of Data Interoperability. And the group is really trying to bring together that knowledge that exists around the place that help and can help people understand the dynamics that need to go into around the people sides of it, which is hard to get hold of, hard to know, and there's lots of, there's material out there, but not necessarily an easy way to tap into, and a lot of experience is not there. The other thing that the group is trying to do is to see if we can draw together a list of do's and don'ts and around that, and some guidelines around how you might go about looking at the social dynamics that play around the data interoperability and facilitate the organizational interoperability to happen, because organizations, after all, are consisting of people. And the third thing the group is trying to do is get a set of use cases together that can help demonstrate how this can work, and so people can draw on that. So yeah, so that's where I'm here, just to explain that. But leave it at that, Timmy, and I want to move on to the next slide.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Yeah, one of the objectives of the RDA4EOSC initiative is to establish these sort of connections. So just to highlight ways that the RDA can actually support organizations and its membership with the different challenges that they have. And I think that your example of the interest group is a very particular one because it's focused on the social bridges, and there aren't many initiatives that address that because it's such a, I don't know, maybe it's because it's such a challenging thing to address. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and hopefully we can get to a few of the questions that we had. Please feel free to add anything that you would like to ask in the chat. I saw that there was already a little bit of an exchange. If by any chance Simon or whoever was part of that would like to add a few words, please feel free to say. But in the meantime, I'll try to just start with a question that goes for, that is well, is open to our speakers. And well, we would like to know what are the challenges that that you think we are looking at in terms of interoperability, considering the wide range of organizations that well, RDA and the EOSC and similar structures are trying to cater to. So what are ways to address these interoperability challenges? I know, Oscar, you gave a very clear example in the case of your organization, but I was thinking, considering the broad range of types of organizations, what would be maybe a common ground or first steps that can be taken?
I'm not sure. I mean, if I could start probably from my point of view, I think that, I mean, what I would really find very useful for a research performance organization like UPM could be really to have something similar to very clear guidelines, yeah, that we can follow, that can be followed by similar types of universities in this case, very kind of engineering oriented, and that could be shared across all of them, because I'm pretty sure that we are all going through more or less the same context. So I mean, like a clear, real sharing of guidelines in the same way that we have been reusing the LERU, this League of European Research Universities, yeah, guidelines for analyzing where we are, having also the guidelines on how to apply open science principles. I think that would be very useful for us.
Anything you'd like to, thank you very much. Anything you'd like to add, Juan or?
Yeah, I think I maybe already said this, but I'll say it again. I think the different disciplinary norms is really a challenge. Different disciplines has different starting points. And if we want them all to adopt, then we have to kind of build a framework which accommodates all the different starting points. We have to motivate adoption. So what is in it for organizations to join the party, as it were? What can we do to make sure that there is recognition and motivation for different parties to join and share? And then finally, I think we have to worry about the independence. If different projects or different organizations will always remain independent and are participating voluntarily, how do we ensure that their voice is recognized in any developments so that everyone is happy with the direction that EOSC takes as it progresses?
So I'll add to the question, Timmy. I think so. In Australia, we've been looking at this in a slightly different way. Well, probably not different, but conceptually, what we looked at when we've been looking at establishing some of the science clouds here, or data commons here, has been to look at it as a marketplace and say, what's that ecosystem that you need to have around the data? So we take the data as the traded item. What are the incentives that are there that we need to think about that motivate the people who produce the data to contribute that data to make it available to participate in there? And then what are the incentives for the people on the consuming side to use that and to have that exchange, value exchange happening? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean monetary, but there is that value exchange that's happening. So by looking at it that way, you can start, we've started to, there's a range of levers that you can put, ranging from sort of policy level down to individuals and the governance structures that go around it that enable that to happen. So that's from a very macro level, when you're looking at that large scale, that's probably one sort of model that helps in thinking about it that way. The other one that I've been toying around with that makes is I think when you're looking at it at that scale, there is a lot to come up that urban planning has to offer, because they, in a sense, they kind of have the similar sort of problem, because you've got a lot of independent groups that you need to somehow be able to bring into something coherent that makes a great city, right? So there are analogies in urban design that I think are applicable here. There are three things that I've used in our concept called design, the density, mix, and access. Right? Density looks at how much, what's that critical mass of things that make it useful, and we see this all the time. Disparate data is useful, but as that volume grows, that becomes a lot more attractive, and you have this watering hole effect where everyone wants to come after it hits a certain point. But then it can get too big, and then it's too hard, and then it doesn't help people go in there as well. So then it becomes a disincentive. So there's a balancing act there. And how do you get that mix right? The other is the mix. What's the mix of things that you need to have in the urban design? You talk about needing the coffee shops along with the businesses, along with the manufacturing, along with the living areas, and so on. In this case, it translates to things like what are the data sets that we need to have to make this useful? What are the mix of people that you need to have? You need the scientists, you need the software engineers, you need to have the developers, the data scientists. But there's a mix there that helps in bringing that together. And as we start to think about those things and start to build that, you then create this environment that there is a natural need to interoperate. So at a very macro level, those are the sort of things that can look at. And access is about the distance. How far is it from one to another, right? In the physical world, it's the road distance in that way. But in this case, it's the barriers, how the openness. There are degrees of openness, that's one. How interoperable is the data? How easy is it to link other data together? Those sorts of things start to play into that. So at that scale, I think someone looking at those sort of things will help. And then certainly very early in the thinking, I don't think there is a whole lot of thinking in there, but those are sort of things that are worth exploring. Those sort of things that we're looking at.
Thank you for that. That was a very good overview of the various levels of issues that need to be addressed, and also how I like that you went back to the idea that Juan had discussed about the balances that need to be achieved. And there you go. We have another analogy or metaphor for EOSC to take away. We have another question, actually more of a statement and a suggestion from Angus. He's saying that it would be useful to gather examples of the uptake of disciplinary interoperability frameworks, describing the organizational interoperability aspects that have been challenging and how these have been overcome. I know that there are several initiatives that are working on various frameworks that support interoperability at the different layers. So I think that would be a very useful exercise. Thank you, Angus, for the suggestion. Do you want to speak to that, or if by any chance you do, please feel free to raise your hand. In the meantime, we have another question from Melissa. She's asking if there is a community of key players who are working at creating cross-sector interoperability, and if you can suggest any of those. I mean, I'm assuming the EOSC itself is is an example of that, but please.
I mean, I'm not aware myself of this cross-sector interoperability part, but probably, I mean, Juan may comment on this. On the previous one, on the domain-specific interoperability frameworks, even if it is a little bit outside of the context of EOSC, I have been involved in the Shift2Rail interoperability framework implementation. That was mostly focused on trains and, I mean, like railways and so on. And obviously, I mean, many of the elements that this interoperability framework had were quite similar. In my specific case, I have been mostly involved in the semantic interoperability part, defining all the governance that has to be done in that context, how the metadata and ontologies have to be maintained. And I mean, there are no final steps yet. I mean, like there are still lots of things to do. I mean, interoperability is a never-ending story. I mean, there will be always new things to add. But there are some clear examples that could be useful for the context of EOSC. So, I mean, I would be happy to provide some further input on that, yeah, if you wish, Angus. Mm-hmm.
Yes, if you would like to share that, we can also add a few links in the follow-up message to this webinar. Juan, Kieran, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, briefly. I think this question, like many others, is about question of how broad do you want to go. The broader you go, the more difficult it is to set standards. And, you know, on the other hand, if you're too narrow, then you're the only one using the standard, and that doesn't work either. So it really is about judging how broad you need to go. And I think here, like in many other things around standards for EOSC, we have to recognize kind of two levels. You know, we may need a catalog of catalogs rather than try and get the one definitive catalog. So that may be, you know, a listing of different groups of people working on interoperability rather than trying to just get one single group working across the whole subject. And I think that kind of catalog of catalogs approach works also for formats, for APIs, for vocabularies and all that. So we have to have a hierarchy here rather than a single solution.
Absolutely, and I think one of the lessons is that there's no one solution fits all. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, thank you for that. Kieran, did you want to add anything to that, or I can move on to the? Sorry.
No, I think that was, yeah. Didn't have much like that.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, you have also a suggestion from Simon, who is highlighting the work that CodeData is doing with the DDI Alliance. And I think that there's a webinar tomorrow on this specific topic, if I'm not mistaken, Simon. So perhaps you can pop that link in as well, and Melissa can join that if it can be of interest. I think we're quite at the top of the hour. If there are any additional questions, I would very much, we can address these. If not, I will try to follow up with a few links and also the recording from this webinar. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for the discussion. This has been very interesting, and hopefully it will drive more discussion and also a broader participation to your group, Kieran, who is actually addressing this sort of layer that has not been that much discussed. So if you have any thoughts that you would like to add at the end, I welcome these. If not, thank you very much for joining the webinar, and thank you to our speakers for their insights. And well, have a lovely day.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Demir.